Welcome to Editorial Avoice, a voice for creators. I'm your host, Daniel Norton. In this episode, we're going to talk about the philosophy of portraits, about making portraits, about some of the types of portraits, and some of the things we can do to achieve better portraits. We've also got a really nice review, so let's get to it. This week, I want to talk about a subject that's near and dear to my heart, if you will, which is portraiture. I consider myself a portrait photographer. For many years, I worked in the fashion industry, photographing catalogs and editorial and that kind of stuff. But even then, I really was trying to capture, in some ways, what I would consider a portrait. So we're going to talk a little bit about what a portrait is, kind of how they're used, some thoughts that I have on them, and I would love to get some feedback from you guys. You can leave a message using the Anchor app and send an email to editorialvoice@gmail.com and let me know what you think. So let's start off by breaking our portraits down into three categories to kind of analyze them, if you will. The first one I'm going to call a practical portrait. That would be something maybe you want for work, like a LinkedIn profile. Then we've got the emotional portrait, which is something like pictures of your family that you take, not the formal family portrait, but like pictures that you would take, let's say on a holiday. And then we have what I'm going to call the artistic portrait, which can also fall into some commercial stuff like editorial, where we're trying to either say something about ourselves oftentimes, or something about society, or something in general, whatever the statement you're trying to make through portraiture. You're trying to show something. And you're possibly using what is the truth of the person, which we're going to get into, to do this, but there's something behind it beyond just a picture of the person. I'm going to start off with the simplest one, at least we'll see if it's the simplest one, the headshot, or the portrait for work, or the commercial portrait, or however you want to call it, the practical one. This is basically going to be an image of somebody that we're going to want to use to identify them in a way that identifies them not just as this is John Smith, but this is John Smith, the CEO of blah, blah, or this is Jane Johnson, the author, or this is Martha Jones, the chef, right? These are people we're going to want to identify their image with their work, so that people will want to either buy stuff from the company, or want to work with them, or purchase their book, or something to that effect. If you're writing a cookbook, and you might on the cover of the cookbook put images of the food, right? People are like, oh, I want to know how to make that soup. But if you are an established chef, you might also put a small image of yourself, or possibly that's on the back, because people will recognize, oh, I like Martha's soups, so I'm going to buy this book. Obviously, the picture of the soup on front helps as well, but this is the thing, right? We're using the image to connect the person to their work/job. So if you're doing things on, but the thing I mentioned a lot would be like LinkedIn, right? So LinkedIn is really popular, obviously, for business people, and people are going to want an image on there. And remember when I first started using LinkedIn years ago, a lot of people just had basically snapshots, or, even a lot of corporations did that, or still do it. In fact, and I say snapshot meaning like this plain kind of shot that looks like somebody in the office took it, that isn't necessarily given the time or the proper equipment maybe to generate photos that are more interesting than just effectively a simple headshot. These kind of images don't have to be that, but they typically end up being that, because people want something that fits in a lot of times in business, right? The person that sticks out sometimes gets the gig, but more often than not, the person that kind of has the right thing fits in. I remember, total sideline here, but similar, when I was doing actors' headshots early on, one of the pieces of advice I got from somebody who had been doing it for a long time, and this advice, by the way, is no good anymore, but at the time it made a lot of sense. They said, make sure that when you're shooting headshots that you shoot them vertically, because when a casting director sits down at the table to go through the headshots, they are, holding them vertically, because that's how most headshots are, and they're going to flip through the physical headshots. And if they have to turn your headshot to the side, they're likely not going to look at it, because they don't want to take that little extra effort. They're looking at 500 headshots a day. They want to see what they want to see. They want to identify you by this image. They don't want any trick. They don't want anything weird going on. They want that. This has changed a lot. And I think that digital media has changed it, because people are usually, their first look is generally online. So they're looking at less big stacks of headshots. And obviously online, it can be just about any shape you want. So when we look at things like LinkedIn, though, they're usually like square. I guess Facebook is also square. A lot of things are square now. So we want to think about that. Like, how is this going to look on a page full of images of other people? And we might actually create something interesting for somebody for LinkedIn. But then when we shrink it down really small, we see that that just looks like a blob of weird color and there's nothing interesting going on there. So we want to consider the platform when we're creating this kind of portrait. Now, it's still a portrait in the sense that we're capturing them, right? But what we want to do generally here is we want to just think about what is the image that this person's trying to project. Are they are they the kind of person that does, let's say, HR, so they want to look really friendly, or they're a marketing person, so they want to look friendly, or are they a real business person, they real CEO or some kind of officer, they want to look powerful, they want to look smart, I guess. They want to look established, they want to be dressed a certain way so that they have this certain criteria. Now, we know, at least I hope you know, that means nothing in a lot of ways, right? Clothing, you should say clothing makes the band, I guess is what the statement was. But the reality is that a lot of people with a lot of money still just walk around in jeans and t-shirts. That doesn't mean anything, but in life. But in photos, a photo is oftentimes you're creating an image of what is expected. So you might be a CEO that always wears a t-shirt, maybe you do the Miami Vice thing, a t-shirt and the jacket over it, whatever it is, right? But the reality is, in your LinkedIn photo, you're probably going to want to wear something more classic unless people already know you. If you're established and people know, oh yeah, that's the CEO that wears the funky band t-shirts, cool. If you're not known for that, you're taking a risk to not do that. So when you're photographing people like this, keep those things in mind and talk to your client, right? Think about it, discuss this with them. If they want to wear the funky band t-shirt and the thing, cool. But maybe also let's do a straight one so that we have that image, because we don't want somebody to feel like they didn't get what they needed. We want to project the thing. If somebody's looking at this for the first time, the assumption is they don't know this person. We want to shoot an image that's going to attract them. Now, if it's let's say they're speaking at a conference and it's going to be a big poster or something like that, now we can start to get a little bit more funky, because now people are going to see it in a larger format. One of the things we really want to consider with all of our work, even though it's hard to really know these days because it's used everywhere, is where is this going to be showing up? And you're going to ask people and they're going to tell you, oh, everywhere. So you gotta don't let them do that. Say, well, is it going to be LinkedIn? Because if so, you're going to want square. Is it going to be for a poster? You're going to want this. Is it going to be for a book cover? You're going to want this. And this way, are you going to send it out as press releases? It might look like that. Is it going to be the banner of your website? Because we want to think about how these things are going to look, because the size of the image in the end will matter how you want to frame it up, what the background might look like, and all that other stuff, So keep that in mind for these kind of shots. We want to talk to the client about what they want to project, so that when somebody looks at it, they see instantly what the client wants them to see. Now, emotional type photos, so photos of your family and things like that, these are a little different because these are often more candid, right? They're not as thought about. And oftentimes we think they're more felt. I've talked about this before. This might be a whole good type of topic. Let me know if this is a topic for you, feeling versus thinking, but I'm just going to talk about it very briefly here. The idea that if you are really connected to somebody, they're your family, they're your friend, you're close to them, you're going to make certain images that are different than somebody outside the circle, right? This is why documentary photographers, for instance, to go more kind of that way, try to stay. They embed themselves with groups of people that they want to document for long periods of time. They don't just show up one day, photograph, and leave. You're not going to get the real, I'm doing air quotes, the real people when you do that, because people are always going to project a front. They're always going to project what they want you to see at first. The walls, the barriers break down when you are allowed inside the inner circle. So if you've got your family and you're hanging out on a holiday morning and everybody's kind of, not quite ready for the day and they're having breakfast, these are times where people are more, again, air quoting, themselves, right? And these are the kind of portraits that we can make during those moments. Silly things happening, people doing things that these people. Now it's stuff that you understand, these people, so you're making these photos. This is why I remember years ago, I heard somebody say, and I've heard this before, that, I hired this wedding photographer and they're really, super expensive and fancy or whatever. But, when I look at it, I really love the pictures that my friends took at the wedding better than what they did. What a waste of money. And then I looked at the pictures, in this case, I've heard it before and not looked at the pictures, but in this case I looked, and the pictures they were pointing out that they loved were all they were basically snapshots. They were these little hidden moments that, the wedding photographer didn't necessarily capture because maybe they didn't understand that that was a thing. That was an inside joke. That was an inside story that they didn't know about. The pictures the wedding photographer took were real classic kind of standard pictures. They weren't bad, but they didn't have that little insight. So that is why a lot of times we've seen, now people use cell phones, but we've seen people like put disposable cameras and things like that on tables at weddings to let the guests shoot. A lot of times you get really terrible pictures that way, but you might get a handful of pictures that really capture something that's deeper than what somebody from the outside can capture, because it's part of the inner circle making those photos. They're catching the real emotion. And these images are the ones that, truly connect us, right? So we can remember when we're looking at these things, we can be like, oh yeah, that's, Sue always has her hair that way, that kind of thing, right? So it kind of becomes part of our history in a different way than something that's created from the outside, something kind of fixed or static, like a school portrait, right? It's something that you made. I have tons of pictures that I took when I was younger of all of my friends, and I'm quite sure that if you held those up to the pictures that they had taken for school, they're much different than what you would expect. And a lot of times we see, this is even in fashion, we get this style sometimes that we create where the photographers are interacting with the subjects that they're, because when you're a fashion photographer, you're in that industry, generally you're in that industry. There's some industries, like let's say you're a corporate headshot photographer, you show up, you meet the person, you shake their hand, you take their pictures, what it is what it is. Generally fashion people live in that industry. They hang out with other people in the industry, they become friendly with them, they interact with them a lot. So there's a different vibe if you can really photograph people in your own community. And there was this style that was popular for a while, things come and go, where it really felt like the photographer was just shooting while they were hanging out kind of vibe. And it was really interesting because it was different than what you would expect, because these barriers were broken down. And then I would see people, because they would come to me and be like, I want to shoot stuff like this. And they would use the techniques, but they wouldn't have that connection, and it just wouldn't look the same. It would kind of look bad, because a lot of time the technique in those were real simple and basic, because obviously if they're just hanging out with somebody, they don't have time to, light it up all perfectly with beauty dishes and stuff. So this is the kind of thing, right? This personal, emotional portrait is another aspect of what we create. And when I talk about this stuff too, keep in mind, I'm not talking about just professionals. I mean, the first thing, probably more likely, but here, this is where a lot of portraits are going to fall into. This is where everybody that's interested in photography, that photographs people, this is where most of the time they fall. Okay, so the final type that I'm going to talk about here is the artistic, I'm going to call artistic or editorial type portrait. This is the kind of portrait where you are trying to tell a story beyond that actual person. Sure, you're showing the life or the look or the style of that person, but you're making some kind of a statement with it. Perhaps you're going to nightclubs and photographing punks, or you're hanging out where in Union Square where they do the skateboarding, right? And you're shooting these people that do the fun skateboard stunts, or you're photographing street performers. And there's a reason why you're doing it. You're trying to capture a part of a culture, right? You're trying to make a statement maybe about what they believe in and what their story is. You're telling somebody's story through the use of a portrait. You're pulling an example of this person to make a statement, to tell a story, to show something that people haven't seen before. This type of portrait's a little bit different, because oftentimes you're coming into it with an idea of what you want to show. I want to show that these punks have really cool style, or they, have a cause that they're fighting for, and it's not just a random rebellion, whatever the story is. And you're going in there with that intention, and you're going to pick the people that you're photographing based on what you want to show, right? You're going to look for the people that have the shirts that have magic marker written on them that say the political statement or whatever it is, so that they're in the photo, right? You're going to make that. You're going to find the skateboarders that have the stickers or the spray paint on their skateboard of the certain things that you want to showcase. You're not going to take the person that's not showing that, even if they do believe those things and they talk to you and they tell you those things, because they don't physically have that look that you need to capture, because it's a portrait. It's not like, say, a movie or an interview. If you're doing that kind of stuff as well, that's different. But if you're just making a photo and it's just somebody in a plain t-shirt with a plain skateboard that's standing in a plain park, that doesn't say much, right? Or maybe it does if they're with a bunch of people who are dressed differently. Again, we can put these things together in a way that can create a story. And that's what we're doing with the more artistic portrait. We're thinking about what we are wanting to project So it could be, again, if you think about like Avedon's The American West, he went around and he picked people. He casted for that. He was looking for certain ideas, certain people that he wanted to photograph that told a certain story. These type of portraits are kind of creating like an archetype or trying to showcase an archetype of a person, somebody that when an outsider looks at it, they can say, oh yeah, that is a cowboy, or that is a punk, or that is, I don't know, a photographer in New York City, right? You will look and you'll say, okay, that is that person. Now, what are we saying about them? What are we showing? What is the detail? What's important to them? And this is the kind of portrait that is often used, let's say, in magazines or, online now and blogs and stuff, or it's books, right? These are the kind of portraits that I mostly do, where I've got something to say, I'm trying to make some kind of a statement or showcase something, and I'm using my subject as my means to do it. Let's talk about some of the, we'll say, difficulties or some of the things we need to overcome when we're making portraits in order to achieve we'll say the best portrait that we possibly can. One of them is that people have an idea of how they want to be seen, usually. Or they have an idea of how they believe people see them. And maybe that is not what they want showcased. So that when you say, hey, I'd love to make a portrait of you, they might be resistant to it, or I don't really like having my picture taken, because they're thinking, well, I see myself this way, and this is how people see me, and it's not something that I'm happy with. So this can be a challenge to us, because we might see something in a person that we want to capture. We might see somebody and say, wow, I really would love to photograph that person. They're super interesting. And this now becomes, we'll call it a negotiation, for lack of a better word, where you need to talk to somebody to gain their trust, to let them understand that what you're trying to do is create something of beauty, effectively, trying to show something about them that, again, will tell some kind of a story, will highlight something about them, something of interest. This is the key, in my opinion, to getting your subject to feel comfortable, is to really be interested in them, to really be interested in making something that is powerful, interesting, and raises them up. Something that allows them to feel like they are important on some level, and there's something about them that is worthy to be photographed, something about them that is beautiful. And this is one of the things that we struggle with as portrait photographers, or that we work with. Now, it can go the other way too. You may have somebody who, especially in the world of, did another air quote there. I do a lot of air quotes, in the world of Instagram and selfies and things like that, you may have people who have a very specific way that they want to be seen. They've figured it out, right? They understand that you hold your camera up high and you look up into the light and you get this even light on your face, and then you add this filter that kind of blurs everything out and this and that. And this is how they see themselves, and this is how they've been projecting themselves, and they may have gotten good feedback from it. And now they think, this is the only way that I should be seen. I don't want to be seen any other way. I don't want I don't want a picture where you can see the small scar on my face, or the imperfection there, or that one of my eyes is slightly larger than the other, or whatever. Everybody has one eye slightly larger than the other. They don't want, to show that, because they've figured out, for themselves at least, how to create this generic photo where that's not the case, right? It doesn't exist. So getting them to allow you to make a photo of them that isn't the exact thing that they're already doing themselves is also a negotiation. Now it's not that they feel like they're not worthy of being photographed, or they don't like the way they look. It's they've figured out how they like themselves to look. And if somebody's hiring you to make a photo and that's what they want, they just want it basically on a better camera or better done or whatever, then, sometimes you got to break down and just do that. And that's a conversation. But if you see somebody, you just want to work with them, showing them that there's beauty in other things is, again, part of what we have to do. There's this interesting, and I don't think this is new by any means. I think it's maybe more identifiable now as quickly spreading because of media being so easily accessible. But the idea that you are going to look at a celebrity or a influencer, or whoever you want to say it, somebody who's popular online, and you're going to see all these images of them, and people are going to be like, oh, this person has great hair, they have great eyes, or they have whatever, and you want to be like them, right? And then You see they're doing something and you're going to want to do that thing. So breaking people out of that and letting them see that they are in and of themselves interesting is one of the trickiest things. What I think is really funny is that when you look at a lot of, this happens a lot, I think maybe with musicians more so, because it's outside their, typically they become popular not because of what they look like. When somebody becomes a popular musician, sometimes their style and stuff becomes really popular, and people are like, oh, they're so beautiful, whatever. And when you look at them and you were like, if that person was not a musician, I don't think people would think that they were the most beautiful person in the world. Like there's something else, right? There's charisma that comes through the music. And this is true for everybody, right? Just because you're not a famous musician, there's something about you that makes you worthwhile to be photographed. And getting people to understand that and sit for you is one of the biggest challenges when you're trying to create either emotional type photographs when you don't know them that well, or if you're trying to embed yourself in the culture and photograph those people, or the more artistic photographs. So you want to photograph this person because there's something really great about them that you see, but they don't see it because it doesn't match up to the celebrity culture. So these are challenges we have. I would love to hear about your challenges there and some of the things that you guys do to overcome these. What do you do to make people feel more comfortable? What are there things that are very specific? I find it's hard to nail it down myself because everybody's a little bit different. But it's generally a good idea to pick out and be truthful. By the way, this is very important. When you have a subject in front of you and you compliment them or say something positive about them, don't lie. That might sound obvious, but don't say, oh, I'm going to tell every person that they have nice eyes. If that's not what drew you to the person, then don't mention that. Mention the things that drew you to them. Oh, I really like the outfit you're wearing, or I think that color is really great for you, or when the light hit you this certain way, it looked really cool with the shadows here. And if it is again, air quoting here, an imperfection that drew you to them, let them know that. Hey, I love the way that you have this crook in your nose, the way that it's really interesting and adds a lot of character. People know that they have these things about them. People know their own face. Show them that thing that maybe they think is not perfect is the thing that can be the draw for the photo, that can be the thing that brings people in, can be the thing that makes the portrait powerful. Like I said, let me know how you guys do this. You can leave me a message using the Anchor app. Again, the link is in the show notes below, or send me an email at avoice@gmail.com. And I look forward to hearing from you. Okay, we've got a great review this week from L. Witness. 5 stars. In a world full of anyone getting on any platform to just say things, somehow Daniel Norton finds a way to cut through all the static to not only lend genuine insights amassed over decades as a working creative in one of the most competitive industries out there, but also has a natural ability to weave communities. This podcast is the start of a creative community based on the ideals that no matter what discipline or medium you're connected to, can serve as not only a foundation, but as an ethos to keep building as you grow. In a world where we lose sight so often, it's these insights that allow us to maintain vision. Well, thank you. It's funny you say that because I was just guesting on a podcast. I'll put a link in the show notes down here once that one goes live. About that. And we talked about community and how I think it's really important. And it's one of the places where I draw my inspiration is from others. So I like to be part of community. I like to grow communities because I find that helps inspire me to keep going as a creative. And we can really learn from each other. So many different people with so many different backgrounds, so many different ideas and ways of doing things, that if you shelter yourself into your own way of being and you don't expand and grow communities, you eventually go stagnant and stale, in my opinion. Thank you so much for this review. Reviews are a great way to grow a small podcast like this one. If you guys could take a few minutes out of your day to jump on your favorite podcast app and give me a review, or at the very least a rating, that helps push me up in the algorithm so more people can join our community here. Adorama supports this podcast, and you can support them by going to adorama.com and picking up any of your photo, video, electronics equipment. You can also check out adorama.com/create no matter what for the current contests that are going on where you can win all kinds of gear. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like to hear your voice on the show, you can leave me a message using the Anchor app. There is a link in the show notes below. You could also send me an email, adoramavoice@gmail.com. You could either attach a voice message and I'll play it here, or you could just write me up an email and I will read it for you if you ask me to do so. And I'll talk to you soon.